is mainly focused on teaching grammar issues and writing business letters. Teachers pay less attention to writing and preparing academic papers, plagiarism prevention measures. Teachers rarely give feedback to students. Academic writing teachers rarely or sometimes not use modern teaching and learning methods and formative assessment tools to protect students' academic honesty and prevent plagiarism. Based on the research, we can conclude that academic writing courses need to be modernized in order to use interactive and innovative methods of teaching, learning, and assessment. But a single academic writing course is not enough to eliminate plagiarism in students in order to improve academic integrity. It is necessary for the teacher to provide moral education, which offers simultaneous introduction of innovative methods and tools for learning and teaching in different curricula and programs, such as WAKE, which combines value education and knowledge construction, and formative assessment tools, soft skills, which is focused on the value generating and evaluating process. This methodology is developed.
1 minute, Tina.
Sorry?
You have 1 more minute.
Yeah. This methodology is development within the framework of Erasmus Plus Asset Project. We are team of Asset Project coordinator. We have wonderful coordinator, Dorit Alt from Kinneret University. And this methodology prepare Jewish and Jewish people team and Georgian team together. And as I am institutional manager in this project, I participated in methodology, and if you would like, I can share this methodology, very interesting and very modern and very interactive methodology. Also, this WAKE methodology, value and knowledge-based learning, we prepare in the frame of QR project. Coordinator was from Israel, Gordon Academic College, Dr. Professor Ronda Sofer. And this methodology particularly prepared Jean-Luc Patry from Salzburg University, Professor Salzburg University. And I can share, if we are interested in this methodology, I can share. In my opinion, I want to combine this teaching methodology, which will be value and knowledge-based learning, and also together assessment, formative assessment tool, which is based in value tool. And we prepare in the frame this project rubrics, assessment rubrics, cards, evaluation, assignment cards, and
I'm sorry, the time is up, Tina. Thank you.
Thank you very much for.
Thank you very much, Tina. And I think we all would be interested if you could share with us. So you can either share it here or you can send it to me, and we can share it. So thank you very much for your poster and for your colleagues. Okay, we're moving on to our next presenter. We'll take questions at the end. And it's my pleasure to introduce Hadas Marcus, my colleague who teaches academic writing to PhD students at Tel Aviv University. And she will talk about encouraging academics to write for the educated public.
Okay,
go ahead. Everyone, please mute your mics if you're not muted. Hadas, you need to unmute your mic.
Sorry, Harriet.
That's okay. Now we hear you, but we don't see your.
Had a problem. Yeah, I see.
Everything's good now. Okay.
Okay, can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Okay, so the title of my talk is Descending from the Ivory Tower to How to Encourage Academics to Write for the Public. And I have to warn you, some of the comments here by other academics are a bit scathing and a bit provocative. So I don't agree with 100%, but some of them I do. So the Brookings Institution asked, how can we make academic research useful in the real world? And they explained that the ivory tower is an epitaph used to refer to concerns disconnected from everyday life. And the problem is that many universities today publish scholarly writing, which is almost incomprehensible except to a very select few, a very tiny audience. And we see these scholars up here in the ivory tower saying, it's your job to go out and do it. We just study whatever the topic is. So Einstein is very famous for saying, if you can't explain something simply, then you don't understand it well enough. He was also quoted as saying, if you can't explain it to a child or to a 6-year-old, then you don't understand it. And Henry David Thoreau always stressed the idea that we have to simplify our lives, and I want to extend that to writing as well. All of us are very familiar with Anthony Fauci. He's the face on TV, almost constantly explaining to us the dangers of the COVID-19 virus. And he has a gift. His own wife said his enduring gift to society is his ability to make complicated information easy to understand. So even a 4th grader could understand, but also a virologist. And he gives a wonderful little talk, which we don't have time to share, but he says that his goal is to clearly communicate a message, not to impress and not to razzle-dazzle the public with all of his knowledge about epidemiology, about viruses, but rather just to communicate what needs to be done in order to protect their health. I teach PhD students. Last semester for environmental studies. And the Earth Sciences Department at Tel Aviv University came out with a really good idea that the doctoral students should showcase their work. They should actually tell a story about their work. This was at the end of the semester. And it was a wonderful idea because after all the exercises they had done in scientific writing, now they were to tell it as a story for the educated public. So I encouraged them to try to make it as simple and as interesting as possible. And one of my favorite ones was a young man, kind of shy, very poetic in planetary science. And he started it, are we alone in the universe? Humankind's greatest mystery is still unsolved. Fortunately, we are living in a great era where we can, for the very first time, try to actually answer this question. So he really worked on himself to not immediately jump into, the jargon and the complex kind of ideas. In 2014, Nicholas Kristof wrote a really scathing article which set off this heated debate about academic writing. He said that the academic world is a culture of exclusivity that glorifies arcane unintelligibility while disdaining impact and audience. And as a result, we have very few public intellectuals anymore on campuses. And this was published in the New York Times, where professors, we need you to get out there and voice your message, to communicate beyond that little tiny niche, that little ivory tower that you are occupying and that is comfortable for you. And it had quite a backlash, but also it started a huge debate. One of the most interesting, I would say, provocative answers to that was by Steven Pinker, who teaches at MIT and Harvard. He's been teaching writing for many, many years. He's a cognitive psychologist. And he says that beyond driving a Prius and maybe wearing earth tones, the most conspicuous trait of the American professoriate may be the prose style, which he calls academies. And he doesn't like it very much. He describes it as being turgid, soggy, wooden, bloated, clumsy, obscure, unpleasant to read, and impossible to understand. And we have to remember that this is a guy who teaches at Harvard. Here he is again, and he published this little booklet, which is called Why Academics Stink at Writing and How to Fix It. And along with him were a number of other authors. It was free. It was through the Chronicle of Higher Education, and Helen Sword, who I was very happy to hear today, was one of the authors. And he explains why academic writing gets a bad rap. Okay. And one of the things he quoted was a cartoon by Tom Pulse, who's a political cartoonist. And he suggests that zombie nouns and adjectives are one of the signatures of this academies kind of language. And you can see all the nominalizations and all this long talk of trying to say something very simple. And also he quoted a cartoon by Calvin and Hobbes, where, this little boy is saying, I used to hate writing assignments, but now I love them because I realized that the purpose of writing is to inflate weak ideas, to obscure poor reasoning and inhibited clarity. And with a little practice, writing can be intimidating and impenetrable fog. Well, I don't want everything to sound negative, so now let's switch to something a little bit more positive. A wonderful professor at the Hebrew U wrote a book. He's originally an American, A Dam in the River, Releasing the Flow of University Ideas. And he says that if only academics would share the treasures of their knowledge with the general public, it could open the buds of awareness that would enrich our lives. And he manages a natural history museum at the Hebrew University. He's also a very long-standing professor of biology. So how do we do this? I wanted to first show a few cartoons that kind of emphasize the problems. Here's this guy, he says, good start needs more gibberish, you know, get rid of the jargon. If you are familiar with Dennis Dutton, he's a professor, a philosopher, and an expert on aesthetics. And he says, if you pick up an academic book, you don't see it as being graceful or elegant. People are attracted to the scholarly life, but an appealing prose style was never a requirement for the job. Here's a guy writing, says, I put in 126,000 words and all I need to do is figure out the order. And sometimes academic writing can be quite boring. So these are things that students have to consider. And we ourselves as teachers need to think, stop and think about how to teach this kind of writing. Here's a little boy, little girl and her father. Daddy works in a magical faraway land called academia. And this couple, I loved never finishing our dissertations together. There's also this feeling that it goes on forever. So there is a push, even among academic institutions and faculty, that they do want to get out there. They want to make their voices heard. And so you get a book such as this by Mary Beth Gassman, Academics Going Public, and how they can become more active on a national scale beyond the journals. I think that Judy Swan is amazing. She has all kinds of talks. She has a TED Talk. She has long lectures. She has articles. She teaches at Princeton University, The Science of Scientific Writing and Beyond Tips and Tricks. And she really makes it very clear that if the reader is to grasp what the writer meant, the writer must understand what the reader needs. This was in PNS, which is the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States. This idea of using narratives and storytelling to communicate science with non-expert audiences is very important. And that's why I loved the exercise that the Earth Sciences gave to students. Please try to tell a story about your research, not just to write it as if it's an article. And some of the people that I think are best that I've ever...
You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I'll finish. The people that were best, who were scientists and experts that could really communicate a story. My hero is Rachel Carson. She wrote Silent Spring. It launched the environmental movement. And many, many acts, Clean Air, Wilderness Act, and so on. It was against the use of pesticides. It was published in 1962. And after that, the very strong and toxic pesticide DDT was banned. And she unfortunately died of breast cancer 2 years later. She didn't get to really enjoy her fame very much. She became very, very famous, even though she was a shy person. So how does she start the first chapter of Silent Spring? As a story. There was once a town in the heart of America where all life seemed to live in harmony with its surroundings. And the town lay in the midst of a checkerboard of prosperous farms with fields of grain. Just like a story, she's not trying to impress anyone immediately by describing what is DDT and the toxins that accumulate in the tissues of animals and people and so on. Another amazing writer who I enjoy very much is Carl Zimmer. He's written many books and hundreds of articles. He's also writing for things like the New York Times, National Geographic, Time, Scientific American, and so on. And he teaches writing at Yale. He's been doing it for many years. And if you go into his name, you see his class notes about writing about science, medicine, and the environment. He gives these wonderful tips. Like everyone has to have a story. Everyone has to have one central message. And all kinds of things about the structure of how things should be written and what kind of language. So I highly recommend Carl Zimmer.
Okay, we have to end here, Hadass.
Okay, I think I have one more slide left. Is that all right?
Just quickly.
David Quammen predicted the COVID-19 in 2012 in a book named Spillover. It's about zoonotic diseases that transfer from animals to humans. Highly recommended. And I just ask which one sounds better, to say it simply or to say it complicated. Thanks for listening, or allow me to express my indebtedness for your auditory participation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hadass, and a wealth of information that I hope you can share with us the links at some point. Thank you. I'm ready to introduce the next speaker, who is Avi Stayman. He's the CEO and Managing Director of Academic Language Experts, a company dedicated to assisting academic scholars to translate and format their research for publication. So go ahead, Avi.
All right. So really nice to be here today. I appreciate everyone's participation. It's really been fascinating thus far. I guess I'm one of the speakers today who's a little bit different in the sense that I don't have a PhD. But I like to think that I see more academic articles and papers a year, probably maybe than anyone else in the country. Maybe, I don't know if I can compete on an international scale, but I see thousands of papers every year. And one of the repeated themes that I noticed in my own work was that academics for whom English is not their native language seem to be at a real disadvantage, and there's not a level playing field. And the equation of just simply saying, okay, well, they'll edit their papers, it isn't as simple as it may originally sound. And the entire publication process looks different in the eyes of scholars for whom English is not their native language than academics for whom English is their mother tongue. So today's presentation is going to try and take a little bit of a closer look into that idea. So first of all, so the first slide is simply sharing some of the experiences and thoughts that scholars shared with me when they're speaking with me about their academic publication. So what are some of their challenges? So first of all, there's an added layer of complexity. Academic research and writing is difficult enough. Publishing is even more challenging. And there's no question that adding into that, trying to write in your second language or sometimes even a third language can be an uphill battle. And alongside I would say the language challenges, I think that they are accompanied by emotional challenges. And what I mean by that is that oftentimes scholars who are writing feel this sense of inferiority or that they feel that they're not able to express what it is that they're trying to say in a way which will be understood by the reader because it's not their mother tongue. In exactly the same way that when I speak to my children, so I speak to them in English regardless of where we're going to be because I feel that I can express myself in the best way possible. And if we look at research as our baby, in a sense, then it's important for us to be able to speak through it in a way that we're comfortable with. And in addition to making it all the more difficult, academic rhetoric and terminology and style is terse and difficult, as Hadass just mentioned so eloquently. It's difficult as is. So to try and add on to that an additional factor of it not being a language that we're comfortable with makes it extremely difficult. So what I set out to do is I set out to try and dig a little bit deeper and see what I could learn about this phenomenon. And what I found in doing the literature review was that there's a concept called linguistic bias. And what that means is, very simply, academic journals are less likely to publish research that is written, that the quality of the language is poorer than if the quality of the language is higher. Or in other terms, they're less likely to publish the scholarship of non-native English scholars having all other factors be the same than native English speaking scholars. Now, on a certain level, that's understandable, meaning we don't want journals publishing research which is hard to understand or which is full of grammatical errors. On the other hand, we also have to take into account the challenges that these scholars are up against. So there's this term that was coined called linguistic privilege, which essentially means that scholars for whom native is the English language, and by the way, about 80 to 90% of major academic journals around the world are published either primarily in English or in English and another language. They do benefit from a certain level of privilege that others don't. And what I heard from journal editors, which is also really interesting, is that they sort of used good English versus not such great English as a way to differentiate as a way to sort through what they wanted to accept and what they wanted to give a just rejection. Meaning they got so many submissions every year that they had to come up with some artificial criteria for sorting through those different submissions. They said, okay, we'll just, anything that's not really, super polished in English, we're not even going to bother looking at. And that leads to a tremendous amount of frustration on behalf of these scholars, who are the vast majority of the scholars who are submitting academic research, by the way, in the sense that they don't really have access to editing services. a lot of them, or they don't have the resources, especially for scholars coming from non-first world countries. And in addition, their work is, if the journal decides to edit it, oftentimes their work has changed and they don't have active input into being able to say, okay, I accept, here's what I accept, here's what I don't accept. Their research, they feel that their research has changed or taken advantage of. So what we set out to do is we put out a survey to as large of a network as we could reach to try and ask some big questions about this issue. So first of all, we wanted to understand how these scholars perceive the publishing process. We wanted to understand the nature of the pressures they're under to write and publish in English. And we wanted to understand what sort of obstacles were they up against, both emotionally and logistically. So we sent this, so what I wanna point your attention, I put this both in the chat and it's up on the screen right now, this URL. If anyone would like to receive the full report, it's about 10 pages, too long to go through right now, but if anyone's interested in seeing the full report, I'm happy to send it around afterwards. All you need to do is click on this link. It's in, like I said, it's in the chat as well, and put in your name and email, and I'll send you both this presentation and the report right afterwards. I'll also send it to Harriet so she can send it around. But what basically happened is we ended up sending this report out to about 3,700 subscribers. We shared it on social media, different academic listservs, and we got responses from 56 different scholars in 20 different native, who had 20 different native languages, and the majority of them have not used our service before. So what did we find? And I wouldn't say that there are big revelations here that were shocking to us, but I think it was important to datify, if that's a word, and codify what were some, organize the results into trying to find what are some of the major takeaways. So first of all, these scholars expressed that they understood how critical it was for them to publish in English. It wasn't that they were doing it as an optional endeavor. They were forced to publish in English if they wanted to speak on the international level, if they wanted to have their research published in the fora that they needed in order to promote themselves and their career. They found that this having to write in English makes the publishing process even more difficult than it is otherwise. And they suffer from a lack of resources that are available to them for editing their research. In parentheses, I'll say that actually Israel's not so bad in terms of the funding that's available through universities and colleges for these sort of services. It's limited, but in many countries, there's no funding whatsoever. And that can really be a challenge. So what are they looking for? So first of all, they want to understand, they want a better control over the editing process. So for example, is there a way to have some sort of quality check in terms of the research itself without getting into the nitty-gritty of the details of the research right away? Obviously not ignoring the English language issues, but maybe staggering it so that there's a certain process that's gone through, which makes it easier. And is there more of a willingness on the part of the editors to review studies in non-standard, what I like to call non-standard English? I don't believe there's such a thing as English that is correct. Obviously, it depends on the particular locale and circumstances. But is there a way to have some sort of alternative peer review process that takes those considerations into account? Again, the report itself has a lot more data, which I'm happy to send along to whoever's interested. But one,
you have
got it. Okay, so one of the main points that I wanted to bring up is just this simple question. I feel I am at a disadvantage when submitting a paper for publication as a scholar who is not a native English speaker. So as you can see here, the vast majority either agree or strongly agree with that statement. And I think that if that's the case, we're talking about 86% of scholars, we need to address it in some way. So who are the people that can really help? Or who are the institutions and bodies that can help? So I believe that they're divided into three. There are publishers who are making the rules about what sort of manuscripts they're looking at and not looking at. Journal editors who are more in the field and making those determinations on a case-by-case basis. And universities who are encouraging their scholars to publish and telling them that it's something they have to do. They also need to provide that support and that backbone for the scholars. So what do we recommend? So number one is to reform the current publication process, figure out alternative methods of peer review which don't incorporate the current process. So for example, there's one journal that we work with that will do the peer review in Hebrew. Okay, they won't publish in Hebrew, but they'll do the peer review in Hebrew, and then if the paper is accepted, then they'll ask for translation or for editing. So in that way, the scholar at least knows, okay, I have some sort of content feedback. They're valuing what my research before I have to deal with the language issues. structural changes in terms of how the process works, and funding reforms in terms of universities and colleges providing a better funding for these for this research. So, and in conclusion, I think the questions I think we need to ask ourselves is what's the price that we pay if we continue just inertia and continue what we're doing now. So I think we need to understand that we are weakening and we are lessening the pool of knowledge, the international pool of knowledge in critical fields, whether it be Corona or literature or anything in between, if we're not listening carefully to the voices of non-native English scholars and we're getting distracted by their language. Again, I'm not trying to downplay the importance of language. That's my company. That's what we do. We help scholars improve their language. But I think that we need to understand where that fits into the process and how important it is, and how we give a better understanding and training for non-native English scholars. And we have to ask ourselves how we come in. So to conclude, here are some of my personal information. Again, if you want to receive if you have any questions, in general, or you want to receive the report or this presentation, please don't hesitate to be in touch. And thanks again, Harriet, for the invitation. Okay.
Thank you, Avi. Super interesting, and those questions at the end I think are good food for thought for all of us. I for one also have those in mind often in my work. Okay, our next and last but not least speaker is Beverly, and Beverly Lewin taught academic writing to PhD students for 30 years. She now devotes her time to research and discourse analysis of text in the field of science, politics, and literary criticism. And I'm going to just share her presentation. Can you unshare, Avi?
Yes, I'm working on it. Wait, apologies.
You know how to do it?
Usually little thing at the bottom.
I think there's an end share, or I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, there should be. All right, let me X out so I don't hold you up.
Come back in again, though.
Yes, of course.
Can he shut it and start again?
Yeah, 1 second. I need him to stop. Okay, sure. Sorry. Okay, Bev, you can start.
Okay, I hope that didn't come off my 10 minutes, all that fussing around. My topic is literally blurring the border between scientific and popular writing. But stop for a minute now. The picture, that's my name. I'm not Bella, but it's not a picture of me. So, okay, please go to slide 2. Okay. First of all, I want to define my terms. It's not a dichotomy. There is popular writing about science. Popular writing is written by journalists for magazines and newspapers. Scientific articles are written by scientists for academic journals. Now here is an example in 2 headlines, 2 titles about the same set of data. The first is from the British Medical Journal, the use of positive and negative words in scientific abstracts, etc., etc. It is only noun phrases and only the topic. There's no evaluation there. The same data was picked up by Nature's popular magazine, and we have a headline, novel, amazing, innovative, positive words on the rise in scientific papers, which gives you what the author thought is the result. So now the worry among some of us is that some of the excesses of popular writing are seeping into scientific writing. Next slide, please. Now you'll say, well, why should we care? So they make it more accessible, more exciting, but it has gone into medical writing. And we find that, can you do the next slide?
I'm trying, just it's somehow.
Okay, I'll talk while you're doing it. Authors, this is research that was published last year. Authors in the field of medicine use hyperbolic and or subjective language to glamorize, promote, or exaggerate aspects of their research. Now, don't forget, when you say glamorize, exaggerate, you are adding to the truth. So we're going from a very objective stance on reality to putting in a little glamour. Now, an example from a medical, an orthopedic journal, which was in slide 4, which you don't see. Thus, it is not hard to see the vital importance of using fluoroscopy, etc. So the authors of this article studied all parts of the journal. They didn't just study the abstract or conclusion. Such statements, it's not hard to see the importance. There's no room for the audience to think about it. Maybe I don't see the importance. Okay, now we switch rapidly to the work of Lewin, Salaja, Meyer, and Bitsenyo on titles. My colleagues and I studied titles because titles are what attracts the audience to the text, and other speakers today have mentioned that. But more important and more frightening is that titles are the only part that some clinicians are reading, and this has been studied, so that your doctor may not have gone beyond the title in order to prescribe something from you. Okay, now can we find, oh, and sorry, we studied CAM, which is a complementary and alternative medicine. And before anyone questions that, I want to say it is now a legitimate expanding field, and in most important universities, we studied 360 titles from 1995 on to 2016, when the journals first started. Okay, now slide 5. Have we got slide 5, Harriet?
Yes.
Have you got the slides?
Yes, can you see them? Question.
Slide 5. Okay.
We can't see the slides. You're not sharing your
slides.
Well, I gave them to Harriet. Has them.
Yeah, I have them. 1 minute.
Okay.
The slides will show.
1 second. Just let me get it.
Okay. I think you may need, yeah. Okay. Okay. Go back 1, please.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay. Go to 5. Okay. Go back 1. Go back 1. Okay, stop. The titles fall into 3 syntactic categories. 1 are nominals, like the clinical effectiveness of healing touch. It just gives you the topic of the topic. The second class are declarative sentences. Declarative sentences have a finite verb. This particular sentence has 3 finite verbs, alleviates, improves, shortens, but it gives you an example of how a declarative sentence title tells you the alleged conclusion of the article. So the audience may feel he or she does not have to read any further. Could you please turn to the next one? Don't go too far. Stop. Okay. Okay. The third type are questions. There are 2 kinds of questions. One is a syntactic question. Where is the evidence? This is just an example, obviously. And the second is a functional question in speech act theory, which is not syntactic. Placebo or doping. Now you'll please notice that both these questions are a little bit sensationalist, you know, hinting of some alleged, of a plot somewhere. And this is just an example, there are many. Okay, now, what did we find? If you may go to that. Okay, this is the outcome of our research. We found that the nominal type has been going, the nominal type of title has been decreasing in the last 20 years. The declarative sentence has been increasing, and the questions have been increasing even more. And the increase in question types is statistically significant. The declarative sentence change is not yet significant. Now, somebody is going to ask me, but I'm just talking about complementary and alternative medicine. We have checked, and other people have checked, this trend is being found in other types of medical, what you would call conventional medicine titles. Now, what's wrong?
You have 2 minutes.
Next, please. Okay, stop. Now, the question is, so what? So it's a nice title, gives you the conclusion. This is a representative declarative sentence title. It tells you what the conclusion is with no hedging, no limitations, no possible constraints on the findings. It alleviates fatigue. You don't know if it's in 60% or 15%. It's all the words in red are in the present simple, which insinuate that this is a fact of nature, like the sun rises in the east. We all know what the present simple is used for. And there is no hedging, like it may alleviate fatigue and no limitations. And most writers feel that this is very questionable practice and very, and in a way, cheating. Okay, please next. Okay, I will summarize if you can find the slide. The question is, so what? I think Hillary said, your talk should tell the audience, so what? We are teachers of academic English. We are caught in an ethical dilemma. Do we teach to show the research in such a glamorous, sensational way, which is actually is also authorized by some of the guides that say show the importance of your work, or do we take a chance on misleading our audience when we're writing? Now, since when we teach writing, do we want to teach how to mislead our audience? So, since you're all dealing with very mature students, this is something that must be discussed in class, and different articles, different examples, different ways of showing how your work is important and innovating and exciting and sexy have to be developed in the class. And when I have a chance to give a talk that's longer than 10 minutes, I will try to give some suggestions. And this is my address. You can have all the references you want, and you can ask questions.
Thank you very much, Bev. Thank you so much. My apologies, there was a little glitch with your slides. It's my fault, it's my bad.
Well,
I think everyone will be able to get the full presentation.
If anyone wants to see the slides, I can send them. They're beautiful, and my grandson did them.
Not too many, don't worry. Okay, so we have just a few minutes. We have 2 minutes, really, for questions. Let me just go to one for Hadass from Sharon Hirsch. Do you think the story approach can introduce academic articles as well? And you need to unmute. And you have 1 minute to answer.
Okay. No, definitely. I think that the story approach is very successful and it catches the audience. It doesn't matter if it's science or not. In fact, science lends itself to that because sometimes it plays out like a mystery. Like, for example, with the COVID-19, at the beginning, they didn't know the origins of it. They thought it was bats, pangolins, you know. I mean, you can easily turn things into stories.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a lot of requests for your references. And anyone else who wants to ask a question, I just see a lot of comments here. People telling everyone in the chat, you can see terrific talk and great work with the journals. And so if anyone would like to ask, we have time for one more question. Anyone want to try?
Sure, I'll go ahead, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thanks. It's a question for Beverly. Hi, Beverly. Near the end of your talk.
Hi, Jen.
Hi.
This is my adopted daughter, Jen.
No relation, but I wish there were. You said near the end of your talk that you would have some suggestions if there were a little time. I'm wondering if you can offer some of those now.
Well, I did. I made slides with them, but now you're not going to see them. Of course, you know my book, Writing Readable Research, which stresses modesty and hedging and being polite. So suggestions in that. And if I can send anyone who wants them the slides that I made, which show alternative ways of saying, I am the best guy in the world, and everybody else thinks. There are ways of showing your research without impugning the integrity of other people.
Okay, thank you, everybody. I think our time is up. We had until 3:15, and that's exactly the time now here in Israel. As you mentioned, someone else mentioned before, sunny Tel Aviv. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you all presenters.
Thank you for coming.
Bye.
Bye,
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 Bella.
Now this is really Bella.
Bye.
Bye, Hadass.
Hi, everybody.
And Trudy, you were there. Where are you?
Good to see you. Nice to see you.
Same. Oh, sorry.
We have to shut it.
To hug you.
No, you're not supposed to touch.
You were the best. I'm telling you. Look.